History remembers Elizabeth Báthory as a vampiric monster who bathed in the blood of virgins to retain her youth, but the official court transcripts from 1610 reveal a truth that is actually far more terrifying. She never bathed in a single drop of blood. She was simply a protected, aristocratic serial killer who tortured for the sheer sociopathic thrill of it. To understand how a single woman could allegedly murder over 600 victims with absolute impunity, we must look at the untouchable political power of the Báthory family in 16th century Hungary. Born in 1560 into a dynasty that produced kings and princes, Elizabeth was highly educated, fluent in Latin, German, and Greek, but raised in an era of staggering medieval brutality. At the age of 15, she was married to Count Ferenc Nadasdy, a celebrated and vicious military commander known as the Black Knight of Hungary for his ruthless campaigns against the Ottoman Empire. While her husband was away at war, Elizabeth was left to manage their massive estates, isolated in the imposing fortress of Castle Chasty atop a lonely hill. It was within these thick stone walls, far from the prying eyes of the royal court, that the Countess began to exhibit a terrifying lack of empathy, treating the impoverished peasant girls sent to her castle as servants, not as human beings, but as disposable playthings to be broken when she suffered from severe, unpredictable migraines or bouts of boredom. Elizabeth did not execute this reign of terror alone. The court records reveal a dark inner circle of accomplices who facilitated her sadism. Among them were Ilona Yo, the head nurse, Dorotea Sentes, a local woman known as Dorko, a deformed manservant named Janos Uivari, nicknamed Fitsko, and a mysterious, highly influential confidant named Anna Darvulia, who historians believe escalated Elizabeth's violent tendencies into systemic, ritualistic torture. The sworn testimonies of over 300 witnesses paint a gruesome, entirely factual picture of the horrors inflicted upon the young servants. Girls who made simple mistakes like stealing a coin or improperly stitching a dress were subjected to horrific punishments. Needles were driven under their fingernails, their flesh was burned with hot iron tongs, and they were beaten so savagely that the blood soaked through the floorboards of the Countess's chambers. One of the most common and historically documented methods of execution did not involve Iron Maidens or bloodbaths, but the bitter Carpathian winter. Elizabeth would order girls to be stripped naked, tied to stakes in the snow-covered courtyard, and repeatedly doused with freezing water until they transformed into statues of solid ice. For over a decade, the disappearances of peasant girls went largely ignored by the authorities, because in the rigidly stratified society of 17th century Europe, the lives of the poor were entirely at the mercy of the nobility. However, by the early 1600s, after the death of her husband, the Countess faced a logistical problem. The local villages had been drained of their daughters, and rumors of the Beast of Chasty caused peasants to hide their children in the forests rather than send them to the castle. To maintain her supply of victims, Elizabeth made a catastrophic miscalculation. She opened a gynaeceum, a finishing school for the lesser nobility, offering to teach them courtly etiquette. When these well-born girls began dying of mysterious illnesses, their influential parents demanded answers. You could kill 1,000 peasants in 17th century Hungary without consequence, but the moment the blood of the aristocracy was spilled, Elizabeth Báthory crossed a political line that even her massive wealth could not protect her from. King Matthias II, who actually owed a massive financial debt to the Báthory estate, authorized György Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary, to investigate the rumors and put an end to the Countess's reign. On the night of December 29, 1610, Thurzo and his men launched a surprise raid on Castle Chasty, and the horrors they discovered upon breaching the doors required no further investigation. According to Thurzo's own official correspondence, they found one girl dead in the main hall, another dying from horrific wounds, and several more locked in a dungeon waiting for their turn. The accomplices were immediately arrested, subjected to the very torture they had inflicted, and subsequently executed. The women had their fingers torn off before being burned at the stake, while Fitzko, the manservant, was beheaded. But Elizabeth, shielded by the immense political power of the Báthory name, was never put on trial, never forced to testify, and never formally convicted of the crimes that defined her legacy. To avoid a public scandal that would seize her lands and disgrace her royal bloodline, the crown agreed to an unprecedented punishment. Elizabeth Báthory was placed under strict, permanent house arrest within Castle Chaita. Legend dictates she was bricked into a single windowless room with only a slit for food, but historical records suggest she was simply confined to the castle grounds, living out her final 4 years under heavy guard until she was found dead on the morning of August 21, 1614. Almost a century later, a Jesuit priest named Laszlo Tarozzi would embellish her story, inventing the myth of the bloodbaths that forever linked her to vampire folklore. But the unvarnished, historical truth is far more chilling. Elizabeth Báthory was not a supernatural entity seeking eternal youth. She was a terrifyingly human predator, enabled by a system of absolute power and wealth that allowed her to slaughter hundreds in the dark, reminding us that the greatest monsters in history don't have fangs, they have titles, castles, and the protection of the state.